St. Mary's senior Logan Eddy has signed with West Liberty to run track and field. He will join Williamstown runners Carson Brundage and Alexis Wynn, who also recently signed with West Liberty. In his time as a Blue Devil, Logan ran track and he also played running back for Coach Jody Moat and the football team. He says the location of the school and the friendly, family-like environment of the coaching staff are some of the things that drew him to West Liberty. Logan gives his thoughts on what the transition from high school to college will be like and some challenges he sees himself facing once he gets there.
Well, they have some fast kids, so I know there's going to be a lot of challenges in trying to break into their top runners and be one of their best guys, which is what I want to do. And of course, switching over I go into a bio pre-med program up there, which is of course difficult, especially balancing that with track. But they have a lot of good helpers up there, some good tutoring places to go to, so I think it'll work well for me.